Not this time.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy 420, where today we are going to be continuing and finishing our risers and fallers early off-season preseason previews with our 2019 tight end fallers video. These are some guys who finished as tight end ones or very top end tight end twos who I think could take a tumble out of those ranges in this upcoming 2019-2020 fantasy season. Before we get started with the four names I'm going to highlight, I did just want to give a little background on how volatile the position was last year. Travis Kelce scored around 250 points, making him the number one tight end. Then Zach Ertz and George Kittle had 225 points around each. Eric Ebron had 190, and then Jared Cook had 165. So while yesterday's video I was really excited about people who could leap up into that tight end one list because there's a lot of names who I think could do that, I also think those numbers tell me there's a lot of names that we could bet that will see a reduced role for some reason or fall off the map and out of that tight end one list respectively. So the first name I have on my list today is Kyle Rudolph, who finished as the number 7 tight end last year for the Minnesota Vikings. A big reason for this is he finished with a 120-point season, but a lot of that was buoyed by a 30-point Week 16 fantasy playoff championship game week for most leagues. The unfortunate thing is you probably weren't playing him in that week. He was fairly inconsistent throughout the rest of the year. He only had 2 double-digit games besides that of 13 and 10 points, and I'm just not really high in him going into the year. He'll be turning age 30 this year, which is usually a downturn in the NFL players' careers, as we talked before. I expect a bigger season out of Dalvin Cook and that running game, so I expect a little bit less passing volume. Draft free agency also, I might predict them to go out and get another tight end, maybe a young guy for him to groom in the future, especially if it's a draft pick. They still have a little bit of need for that position, especially with him getting a little bit older. I like the value out of Diggs and Thielen in these early drafts. I think they're going a little bit later than maybe they should be. I'd rather just take a lot of those guys I talked about yesterday later with a lot more upside than predicting Kyle Rudolph is going to have another 30-point game to reach a tight end 7 overall season. So just not that big going into him. Next game I'm going to mention is Trey Burton. He finished right behind Rudolph as the number 8 tight end. He came into last year with a lot of hype after obviously being a reserve behind Ertz for the Eagles and then signing with Chicago and a new team. He was very good at the start of the year, had 4 double-digit games in his first 6 games, including a 24-point game. But after that, he had 1 double-digit game in his last 10. And a few things scare me about that. First thing being the team was obviously winning, very good, won that division, went to the playoffs. So I don't really see them drastically changing what they did last year. And what they did last year was being a bottom third volume passing offense in terms of attempts and yards. So I don't think they're going to be putting the ball up a ton. I expect them to be a good team, so I would expect them to win that division again this year. Maybe not as many wins as last year, but I would expect them to not change their culture, like I mentioned before, run the ball, play defense, and I'm not really going to be betting big on a low volume tight end, especially like I said, when I can just get a lot of other names later. So the inconsistency factor that I mentioned early on and the fact that I don't think he's going to be getting as many looks makes me really not think Trey Burton is going to produce a tight end one season next year. The next name I'm going to mention, unfortunately, as a Browns fan, is David Njoku. He finished behind Trey Burton as the number 9 tight end. And a lot of people are reaching for him in these best ball drafts. They're predicting a year 3 breakout in that offense. Oh, he's going to get open because the lanes are open and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's going to be the opposite with him, and I disagree. I think it's going to be way too many mouths to feed in that Browns offense, and he's going to be the first one to take a hit in that regard. Once Kareem Hunt comes back, at best, I think he's the 5th option in that offense. Odell, Landry, Hunt, Chubb. I mean, a Callaway blow-up game, he could end up as the 6th option in that offense. Who knows? I'm just not really going to buy in big to a guy with such a small role on that offense. And especially the further you go down on the tight ends, so obviously you have number 1 being Travis Kelce, and then Ertz, Kittle. Those guys are going to see a lot of volume and a lot of catches and a lot of yards because they're being targeted a lot as a top option on their respective teams. If you're going down to David Njoku and he's not going to be targeted a lot because everybody else is going to be getting fed, you're going to need to depend on touchdowns, and that's not really a reliable thing on in fantasy to take aside. I would prefer just waiting longer and getting a guy later like Ian Thomas, Chris Herndon much later, and they're going to have the number 3 option or the number 4 option on their team as a number 5 or a number 6 who's being picked much earlier. I just don't really see why people are buying in so heavily to Njoku, and I just gonna sell high on him, and I think he's gonna fall this upcoming year. So I'm very interested to hear what everybody else has to say about David Njoku. Obviously, I'm going to get some disagreements, but that's why we have these discussions. And the final name on this list I'm going to mention is Jimmy Graham. He finished tight end 13 last year for the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, this is his age 32 year. He's getting up there. He had one game where he had over 5 points in his last 8 games. So wide receivers being beat up all year on that team. He just was signed to that team in the offseason, and it was kind of a down year, so you would think, oh, we'll target Jimmy Graham, get him the ball, and then get him rolling for next year when we're expected to hire a new coach and be better. No, they just didn't throw him the ball. He just didn't really do anything, and it just furthered my belief, or everybody's belief in general, that Aaron Rodgers doesn't really prioritize his tight ends. So while I'm more confident in Green Bay because they had a coaching change and Aaron Rodgers is going to be happier, I'd more or less bump up Aaron Jones, Davante Adams, and the wide receivers who are going to be backing up Adams as opposed to Jimmy Graham. I don't think he's going to finish as a tight end 1. I won't be drafting him in probably any leagues. I don't want to even fall into an early season trap if he has a couple games where I rely on him through the year and I just get bummed with inconsistent play. So I'm, like I said, just going to target those later guys that I mentioned in yesterday's video and sell these guys that I mentioned today. And hopefully it works out well for me and for you. With that being said, everybody, I hope you all have a great afternoon. I will have another talk with you tomorrow with another video, and hopefully I'll see you then. Take it easy.